AITA for exposing my girlfriend after she secretly gave away my dog to punish me. I'm Levi, 36, and when all of this happened, Sienna and I had been together for a little over 3 years. Baxter had been in my life much longer than she had. He's a medium-sized mutt with one ear that stands up and one that folds over like it missed an important meeting. He knows which cabinet holds the treats, can hear a cheese wrapper from 2 rooms away, and sleeps with one paw touching my ankle like he needs to make sure I haven't disappeared overnight. If I close the bathroom door, he waits outside and sighs loudly enough to make it clear I have offended him personally. Sienna used to say that was one of the things she loved about me, that I was loyal, steady, and attached to the things I cared about. Later, she decided that same loyalty was something she needed to break. The strange part is that if you had met Sienna during our first year together, you probably would have liked her. I did. She was thoughtful in a way that felt practical rather than performative. If I had a rough week, she'd make dinner. If I stayed up too late for several nights in a row, she'd suggest we shut off the TV early and go for a walk before bed. She got me drinking more water, sleeping better, and eating something besides takeout when I was tired. None of that bothered me because it felt like care. She would say, I made extra roasted vegetables. Try them before you decide you hate them. I try them. Sometimes I even liked them. She'd laugh and say, see? Growth. Back then, the word was a joke between us. The shift happened slowly enough that I didn't notice it at first. One morning, I opened the refrigerator and the milk I had bought was gone. In its place was a brand Sienna preferred. I asked, did you toss mine? She didn't even look up from her coffee. Yeah, that stuff is garbage. I just bought it. I replaced it. That's not really the point. She gave me a small smile, the kind people use when they think they're being patient with a child. You're getting upset because I upgraded the milk. I remember standing there with the refrigerator door open, trying to decide whether it was worth an argument. It wasn't about the price. It wasn't even about the milk. I just didn't like the feeling of somebody throwing away something I had chosen and then acting like my objection was ridiculous. Still, I let it go. A few weeks later, a bag of chips disappeared from the pantry, then a box of cookies, then leftover barbecue I had brought home after eating with Wade, my best friend. That one annoyed me enough to say something. Sienna, did you throw out the ribs? She was cutting fruit at the counter. The apartment smelled like a dead animal. They were sealed in a container. They were greasy, Levi. They were mine. She put the knife down and looked at me like she couldn't believe I was making her explain this. I'm helping you make better choices. Helping is asking. This is deciding for me. Her face tightened. You know what? Fine. Eat whatever you want. That should have ended the conversation. Instead, she spent the rest of the evening barely speaking to me. When I asked if she was mad, she said she wasn't mad, just disappointed that I was so resistant to basic care. That became the pattern. If I agreed with her, she was warm. If I disagreed, I wasn't just disagreeing. I was resisting growth. I was being defensive. I was choosing comfort over our future. I was making her do all the emotional labor of wanting better for us. I started noticing that the argument was never allowed to stay about the thing we were actually discussing. If I wanted to order a burger, we were suddenly discussing my long-term health. If I didn't want to wake up early on a Saturday, we were discussing whether I had discipline. If I wanted Wade to stop by without giving her 2 days' notice, we were discussing whether I respected the home we were building together. And whenever I pointed out that I was an adult who could make my own decisions, she'd get hurt. Why do you always make this about control? She asked me once. Because you keep telling me what I'm allowed to do. I'm not telling you what you're allowed to do. I'm asking whether your choices match the future you say you want. That sentence was so polished that I almost felt stupid for objecting to it. Sienna was good at that. She rarely yelled. She didn't slam doors. She didn't curse at me. She spoke quietly and used words like values, partnership, standards, health, discipline, and future. It took me a long time to understand that a calm voice doesn't automatically make a demand reasonable. Baxter entered the arguments gradually. At first, Sienna complained that I gave him too many treats. Fair enough. I probably did. Then she wanted to change his food, even though his vet was happy with what he was eating. I told her I'd ask at his next appointment. She said, "Why do you need a vet to tell you what's obvious?" "Because he's my dog, and I'd rather take medical advice from his vet." She didn't like that answer. Then she started criticizing his routine. If he barked when somebody knocked, she'd say. Dogs absorb chaos. If he wandered into the kitchen while I was cooking, she'd say I had never taught him boundaries. Once, after I made a burger, Baxter sat by my chair hoping for a bite. Sienna stared at him and said, "This is what I mean. He has no structure." I laughed because I thought she had to be joking. Baxter is not chaotic because I cooked a burger. She didn't laugh. Everything is a joke to you when you don't want to change. That was the first time I remember looking at Baxter and feeling a little uneasy about how she talked about him. Not afraid, just uneasy. Like she had moved him from the category of family into the category of problem. Around that same time, she started correcting me in front of other people. At a small get-together with friends, somebody asked whether I wanted another slice of pizza. Before I could answer, Sienna said, "He's done." I looked at her. "I can answer for myself." She smiled at everyone. "He can. He just never answers correctly." Two people laughed because they thought it was a joke. I didn't. Later, Wade pulled me aside near the sink while everyone else was in the living room. "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah." He gave me a look. "Don't give me yeah. She just talked about you like you were 12. She gets intense about health stuff. She gets intense about controlling you." I shook my head. "It's not that simple." "Maybe not, but you keep explaining her intentions. I'm talking about what she actually does." I told him we were working through it. He didn't argue. He just said, "Then keep track of what happens. Not what she says she means. What she does." At the time, that sounded excessive. A month later, I understood why he said it. Sienna had started making vague social media posts after our arguments. She never used my name. She didn't have to. One said something about how some people want the rewards of partnership without doing the work of becoming a partner. Another said, "You can't drag someone into growth if they're committed to staying comfortable." The comments were full of people telling her she deserved someone who matched her energy. A couple of mutual friends messaged me asking whether we were okay. I hated it. When I asked Sienna to stop posting about our relationship indirectly, she said, "If you see yourself in something I post, maybe ask why." I said, "Because we had the exact same argument 6 hours before you posted it." She called that monitoring her expression. That was around the time I started doing what Wade had suggested. Nothing dramatic. I didn't build some secret case file. I just stopped deleting texts. I kept receipts when groceries I bought vanished and were replaced. I saved a couple of messages where she admitted throwing food away. I took screenshots of the vague posts when they clearly followed specific arguments. Not because I was planning revenge, because I was starting to feel like I couldn't trust my own memory after every disagreement ended with Sienna telling me I had misunderstood what happened. The dinner that finally blew everything open happened on a Friday night. There were 6 of us at the table, including Wade. It was casual, nothing fancy. We were talking, passing menus around, and for once I thought Sienna and I might get through an evening without tension. The server came over to take our orders. Before I could speak, Sienna said, "He'll have the grilled vegetable plate. No butter." The server looked at me. I looked at Sienna. "I'll order for myself." She gave a little laugh. "I know what you're going to pick. Still my choice." I turned to the server and ordered a steak with a side salad. Nobody said anything for about 2 seconds. Then Sienna leaned back in her chair. "Seriously?" I said yes. "You know, this is exactly why I can't build a future with someone who has no self-control." The table went quiet in that instant way a room does when everybody suddenly wishes they were somewhere else. I could feel Wade watching me. I didn't raise my voice. "You don't get to manage me like a project." Sienna's expression changed. "I was trying to help you." "Then ask. Don't order for me and insult me when I choose something else." She folded her arms. "You're proving my point." "No, I'm setting a boundary." One of our friends tried to lighten things by changing the subject. It didn't work. Sienna barely spoke for the rest of dinner. When we got home, she shut the door behind us and said, "You humiliated me." I laughed once, not because it was funny, but because I honestly couldn't believe her. "You told a table full of people I had no self-control. Because you undermined me after we've had this conversation 100 times. You ordered my food." I was trying to make one evening easier. "For who? For us." "No, for you." Her eyes filled with tears, but her voice stayed level. "You keep choosing your ego over our future. I'm choosing not to be managed. So that's your answer? My answer is that compromise is not obedience. She stared at me for a long moment. Then she said, I need you to decide whether you're actually committed to growing with me. What does that mean? It means we need real house rules. Food, routines, guests, finances, Baxter. All of it. We keep pretending we can just wing this, and we can't. I told her I would talk about shared expectations, but I was not signing up for a system where she got final approval over my choices. She called that performative maturity. I slept badly. The next morning, Sienna was polite but cold. She left around 10 without saying much. I took Baxter for a walk, came back, made coffee, and tried to give both of us space. Later that afternoon, I had to go out for a few hours. When I came home, the first thing I noticed was the silence. Baxter usually heard my key before I even got the door open. His nails would scratch across the floor, and he'd be waiting with that whole body wag dogs do when their tail isn't enough. There was nothing. I stepped inside. Bax. No response. His bed was empty. His leash was gone from the hook by the door. His water bowl had been washed and placed inside a cabinet. For some reason, that bowl being put away scared me more than the missing leash. It looked permanent. Sienna was sitting at the kitchen table with her phone in front of her. I said, "Where's my dog?" She didn't flinch. "He's safe." "Where is he?" "Somewhere he can breathe until you learn discipline." I stared at her. I genuinely thought I had misheard her. "What did you do?" "I did what you were too weak to do." My entire body went hot. I wanted to yell. I wanted to grab her phone. I wanted to demand a name, an address, anything. Instead, I heard Wade's voice in my head telling me to track what she did. So I took my own phone out and said, "Tell me where Baxter is." She shook her head. "No, not until you understand that actions have consequences. He is not your consequence to hand out. You're making this dramatic. You took my dog." "I moved him temporarily. Without my permission. For his well-being." "Where is he?" "When you show me you're serious about the changes we discussed, we can revisit that." That was the moment everything in me got strangely calm. The angriest I have ever been was also the quietest I have ever made myself. I said, "Okay." She looked almost relieved, like she thought I had finally understood the lesson. Then I walked into the bedroom, closed the door, and started making calls. The first was to Baxter's vet. I confirmed that I was still listed as his owner and primary account holder. I asked them to put a note on his file that nobody else had authority to transfer records or make ownership changes without speaking to me directly. Then I pulled up his microchip information. It was registered to me. Same phone number. Same email. I found his adoption paperwork and vaccination records. I called the pet daycare he occasionally attended and asked whether anyone had picked him up or tried to change his authorization list. They hadn't. I called the police non-emergency line, explained that my girlfriend had taken my dog without permission and refused to tell me where he was, and asked what I should do without escalating things. The person I spoke with told me to document ownership, save communications, avoid confrontation, and make a report if necessary. I did exactly that. I sent Sienna one text, even though she was in the next room. "Where's Baxter?" A minute later, she replied, "He's safe. I did what you were too weak to do. When you're ready to take our future seriously, we can talk about him coming home." I stared at the message for a while. Then I took screenshots and backed them up. A few minutes later, she knocked on the bedroom door. "Are you seriously texting me from inside the apartment?" "Yes." "That is incredibly immature. I want a written record." Her expression changed. "Of what?" "Of you refusing to tell me where my dog is." She crossed her arms. "You're trying to turn this into something ugly." "No, you already did that." She walked away. That evening, while I was checking shelter and rescue listings, she left me a voicemail, even though we had been in the same home less than an hour earlier. Her voice was soft and controlled. "Baxter is safe. Whether he comes home depends on whether you finally take this seriously. I'm not punishing you, Levi. I'm asking you to prove that you can make better choices for the life we said we wanted." I saved that too. Then I remembered the doorbell camera. Sienna knew we had it, obviously, but I don't think she thought about it because it mostly existed to catch package deliveries and neighborhood cats wandering onto the porch. I opened the app and scrolled back. There it was. A timestamp from earlier that afternoon. Sienna came out holding Baxter's leash. He followed her willingly because Baxter trusted her. He looked back once toward the door before she let him out of view. A few minutes later, a car pulled up. I couldn't see the driver clearly, but I could see Baxter being loaded into the back seat. That clip did something to me. Until then, there had been a tiny part of my brain still trying to treat the whole thing as a relationship fight that had gotten out of control. Watching her calmly lead him away while I was gone made that impossible. This was not a heated argument. It was an action she had prepared for. I called Wade. He answered with, "What happened?" I must have sounded strange because I hadn't even said hello. She took Baxter. There was a pause. What do you mean, took? She gave him to somebody. Won't tell me who. His voice changed immediately. Do you have proof he's yours? Yes. Microchip? Yes. Messages from her? Yes. Good. Don't threaten her. Don't touch her phone. Don't go kicking in anybody's door. Find the dog first. I know. No, I'm serious. She's going to want you to lose your temper because then this becomes a story about your reaction. Don't give her that. That sentence probably saved me from doing something stupid. The next several hours were a blur of calls. I contacted local shelters and rescue groups to see whether Baxter had been surrendered. I gave them his microchip number and explained that there was an ownership dispute. Nobody had him. I called 2 people I knew through Sienna who had dogs. Nothing. I called Brielle, Sienna's younger sister. She answered cautiously. Is everything okay? No. Do you know where Baxter is? Silence. Why are you asking me? Because Sienna took him and won't tell me where he is. Brielle sighed. Levi, maybe you should just calm down and listen to what she's trying to say. I almost hung up. Instead, I said, do you know where my dog is? I don't know the address. That was the first confirmation that she knew something. Whose address? I shouldn't be in the middle of this. You're already in the middle of it if you know she gave away my dog. She didn't give him away. It's temporary. With who? I don't know. I didn't believe her, but pushing harder wasn't helping. So I ended the call. About an hour later, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. Is this Levi? This is Heather. I have Baxter. I think we need to talk. My hands actually shook. I called immediately. A woman answered and sounded nervous. Hi. I'm sorry. I didn't know you didn't know where he was. Is he okay? Yes. He's okay. He's right here. I had to close my eyes for a second. Thank you. Can you tell me what Sienna told you? Heather hesitated. She said Baxter was being neglected. She said you barely fed him, left him alone for days, and wouldn't take care of medical stuff. She said she was trying to get him out before things got worse. I said, none of that is true. I'm realizing that. I have vet records, daycare records, the microchip registration, adoption paperwork, everything. Can you send me some of it? I did. She called me back 10 minutes later. Okay, she said. I'm bringing him back. I told her I could meet somewhere neutral, but she said she was comfortable bringing him to me. By then, Sienna had left after realizing I wasn't going to argue with her anymore. I didn't know where she went, and I didn't care. When Heather arrived, Baxter saw me before I saw him. The back door of her car opened, and he launched himself out so fast she barely had time to keep hold of the leash. He hit my knees hard enough that I almost lost my balance. I dropped down and grabbed him around the neck while he whined and tried to lick my face at the same time. I checked his collar. Same tag. I checked him all over even though Heather kept telling me he was fine. He was fine. Confused, maybe. A little stressed. But physically fine. Heather looked embarrassed. I am so sorry. I stood up with one hand still on Baxter. You didn't know? I should have verified. Yeah, you should have. But you called me and brought him back. She nodded. Then she said, there's something else. That was when the story got worse. Heather pulled out her phone and showed me messages from Sienna. The first one was from almost 3 weeks earlier. Sienna had written that she was preparing to remove Baxter from a toxic situation and might need a temporary safe place for him. Heather had asked whether animal control or a rescue was involved. Sienna said no, because she was trying to handle it quietly before the owner became reactive. The owner. Me. Not her boyfriend. Not Levi. The owner. Like I was some dangerous stranger she was protecting a dog from. Heather said. She contacted me because a friend told her I sometimes foster dogs. She said this had been building for a while. I asked her to send me screenshots and a written message confirming what Sienna had told her. She did. That was the first real twist. Baxter's disappearance had nothing to do with the argument at dinner. That dinner had just given Sienna the excuse she was waiting for. When I got Baxter back inside, he ran straight to his water bowl's usual spot and looked confused because it wasn't there. I pulled it out of the cabinet, filled it, and put his favorite blanket back on the couch. He drank, circled twice, and leaned his whole side against my legs. I sat on the floor with him for a long time. Then I started separating my life from Sienna's. We had been talking about combining more of our finances. Not everything, but more. There was a shared account we used for certain household expenses, and Sienna had recently suggested increasing how much we both deposited each month. I transferred only the money that was clearly mine from discretionary funds back to my individual account, leaving enough to cover agreed shared expenses. I changed passwords on my personal accounts. I canceled the upcoming appointment we had scheduled to discuss a shared lease arrangement. I updated Baxter's microchip profile with a secondary emergency contact I trusted. I called the vet again and changed the notes on his file. I removed Sienna from the daycare pickup list and added Wade. I also sent Sienna a message. Baxter is home. Do not remove him again. Do not attempt to surrender, transfer, transport, or authorize care for him. You do not have my permission. We will discuss your belongings and our living arrangements in writing. She called immediately. I didn't answer. She called again. Then she texted. You went behind my back and manipulated Heather. I replied once. You gave away a dog you do not own after falsely claiming I neglected him. She sent 3 more messages. I stopped responding. The next morning, Brielle called. At first, she was still defending her sister. You're making this sound criminal when Sienna was trying to get your attention. She took my dog. She thought you needed a wake-up call. Using Baxter? You weren't listening to anything else. I said, do you hear yourself? She got irritated. She just thought if Baxter wasn't there, you'd finally focus on building a real life with her instead of using the dog and Wade and food and everything else as excuses. I went silent. Brielle kept talking for another second before she realized what she had said. I asked, so she told you this before Baxter disappeared? Brielle didn't answer. Brielle. She was upset. When did she tell you? I don't know. A couple weeks ago. That was the second confirmation. I asked, what exactly did she say? Brielle's voice got smaller. She said Baxter was the last thing that made it too easy for you to avoid fully committing. She said once the house had real structure, you'd stop acting single while being in a relationship. What does Baxter have to do with acting single? I don't know. Yes, you do. Another pause. She wanted you to agree to the new rules. What rules? The thing she drafted. What thing? Brielle swore under her breath. I thought she sent it to you. She had not. But she did later that day. Not intentionally. Sienna sent me a long email accusing me of refusing to have a mature conversation and attached a document she called a shared living framework. I'm pretty sure she meant to show me how reasonable she had been. Instead, it explained almost everything. There were sections on food purchases, household routines, visitors, spending, shared savings, exercise schedules, sleep schedules, and pet care. Some of it looked normal at first glance. Couples absolutely should discuss money. They should talk about guests. They should agree on basic household responsibilities. But the details were not equal. The food section said no meat could be stored in the home without prior agreement because of shared environmental values. The guest section said overnight or late visitors required mutual approval, but also included repeat daytime visitors, which obviously applied to Wade. The finance section suggested increasing my monthly contribution to our shared account because my discretionary spending patterns created avoidable instability. The routine section suggested bedtimes and workout expectations. And under pets, it said major decisions should be made by the partner demonstrating the highest consistency with the animal's long-term wellness needs. There was no definition of what that meant. There didn't need to be. Sienna had already decided it meant her. I read the whole document twice. Then I forwarded it to Wade. He called me 5 minutes later. This isn't a relationship agreement, he said. I know. This is employee onboarding. Despite everything, I laughed. Then he got serious. You see it now, right? Yeah. She wasn't asking you to compromise. She was building a system where disagreement automatically meant you failed the standard. That was exactly it. For 3 years, I had been treating each conflict like an individual problem. Milk. Food. Sleep. Friends. Baxter. They were not separate arguments. They were all the same argument. Sienna believed that if she could justify a choice as better, I lost the right to choose differently. I ended the relationship by text because by then I did not want another private conversation where she could reshape what had been said afterward. I wrote, "This relationship is over. Baxter is safe with me. Do not take him again. We can arrange an exchange of belongings in a neutral way. I am not discussing reconciliation." She replied almost instantly, "You are ending 3 years because I cared enough to do something difficult." I didn't respond. Then she did what I should have expected. She went public first. Her post didn't mention Baxter by name. It said she had finally chosen herself after years of trying to build a future with someone who resented accountability. It talked about emotional safety, incompatible values, and the pain of loving someone who refused to grow. The comments filled up fast. "Proud of you. You deserve peace. Never shrink your standards for a man." A mutual friend messaged me. "I don't know what happened, but she says you're being really aggressive about the breakup." Another asked why I was threatening her over a dog. I called that friend. "What exactly did she tell you?" There was an uncomfortable pause. "That she temporarily moved Baxter because you weren't caring for him properly, and now you're trying to punish her for protecting him." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "That's false." "Well, that's not how she described it." "I know." I could have posted everything right then. I wanted to. Wade stopped me. "Don't rant," he said. "She wants a messy public fight because messy lets people pick a side based on personality. Give them a timeline. So I should post. I'm saying if you respond, be precise. Don't call her names. Don't diagnose her. Don't speculate. Show what happened." I took that advice. Before I posted anything, one of the friends in our circle invited both of us to a small gathering because Sienna had apparently told everyone she wanted one calm conversation so there wasn't bad blood. I almost declined. Then I found out she had been privately telling people that I was unstable and that she was worried I might retaliate. So I went. Wade came too. There were 7 people total. Brielle was there. Sienna arrived before me and was already sitting on the couch when I walked in. Baxter was not with me. He was with someone I trusted. I wasn't bringing him anywhere near that conversation. The atmosphere was awkward from the start. One friend said, "We just don't want this turning into something ugly." I said, "Neither do I." Sienna gave me a sad little smile. "This is what I've been trying to say. I don't want to fight." I sat across from her. She started talking about how our relationship had been struggling for a long time, how she had tried to support my health, how I had become defensive whenever she raised concerns, and how Baxter had been living in an unstable dynamic. She made it sound like she had rescued him from a disaster zone. Then she said, "I did what I had to do because he was never going to grow up." One of our friends looked at me. Was Baxter actually in danger? No. Sienna sighed. Of course he's going to say that. Another friend said, "Levi, if she only had him somewhere else temporarily, why are you making it such a huge issue?" That was my cue. I unlocked my phone. Before anyone decides I'm the villain, you should know what actually happened. Sienna's face changed slightly. I started with the boring stuff. That mattered. I showed Baxter's microchip registration under my name. Then his adoption records. Then his vet account showing me as the owner and primary contact. I showed recent appointment records, vaccinations, and daycare attendance. Nothing dramatic. Just proof that he was mine and that I had been consistently caring for him. Then I played Sienna's voicemail. Her own voice filled the room. "Baxter is safe. Whether he comes home depends on whether you finally take this seriously." Nobody spoke. I showed the text where she wrote, "I did what you were too weak to do," and said Baxter would come home when I took our future seriously. Then I showed the doorbell clip. Sienna stood up. "This is insane. You've been building a case against me. No, I saved what you did. You're twisting everything. I looked at the others. Here's Heather's message. I read the relevant part aloud. Heather confirmed that Sienna told her I barely fed Baxter, left him alone for days, and neglected medical care. She also confirmed Sienna contacted her weeks before our dinner argument. One of the friends frowned. Weeks before. I nodded. This wasn't a panic move after dinner. It was planned. Sienna shook her head. I was preparing in case things got worse. Worse how? Wade asked. She looked at him. This is none of your business. He leaned back. You made it everybody's business when you told everyone he neglected his dog. Sienna turned back to me. You know exactly what I meant. Baxter needed stability. He had stability, I said. What he didn't have was your permission to be used against me. She started crying. Not loudly. Sienna was never loud. She covered her mouth for a second and said, I cannot believe you're humiliating me like this. I said, you humiliated me for months. I'm not humiliating you. I'm correcting the record. That is such a cruel way to frame this. You can call it protecting him. The paperwork calls it taking a dog that wasn't yours. She looked around the room for support. For a few seconds, nobody gave it to her. Then Brielle spoke. Sienna, maybe you should just tell them the whole thing. Sienna snapped her head toward her. Don't. Brielle looked sick. I didn't know she lied to Heather, she said quietly. Sienna said, Brielle, stop talking. That guaranteed she was going to keep talking. Brielle looked at me. She told me Baxter was the last thing keeping you from fully committing to the relationship. She thought if he wasn't there, you'd agree to the new house arrangement and focus on the two of you. Nobody said anything. I asked, even though I already knew the answer, when did she tell you that? A couple weeks before the dinner. Sienna stood up. You are completely betraying me right now. Brielle looked at her. No, I defended you because you told me he was neglecting Baxter. You made it sound like you were protecting the dog. I was. You were using him. Sienna's entire calm persona cracked for maybe 5 seconds. He would not listen, she shouted. It was the only time that night she raised her voice. Then, almost immediately, she lowered it again. I tried talking. I tried compromise. I tried being patient. Nothing changed. I said, that doesn't make Baxter yours to take. You keep reducing everything to ownership. Because you took something that belonged to me. He is not a thing. I know. That's why using him as leverage was worse. She stared at me. There was no answer to that. The gathering ended shortly after. Nobody had some dramatic movie-style reaction. There was no applause. No one threw a drink. That made it feel more real, honestly. People just became quiet around Sienna. One friend who had defended her earlier said, You told me he neglected Baxter. Sienna replied, I said I had concerns. He said, No, you said neglected. That was the beginning of her losing control of the story. The next few days were mostly logistics. Heather cut contact with Sienna and sent me a more formal written statement of what she had been told. Brielle apologized to me without asking me to forgive Sienna. Her message said, I should have questioned it. I thought I was backing my sister. I didn't realize I was helping her justify something that was already planned. I appreciated that she took responsibility without making excuses. A couple of mutual friends apologized too. Others simply stopped commenting on the situation. Sienna deleted her original post. Then she put up another vague one about private pain being weaponized publicly. That was when I decided I was done relying on goodwill. I got legal guidance and sent a civil demand letter telling her to stop contacting me except for necessary property arrangements, and to stop making false statements that I neglected Baxter or behaved aggressively toward her. It also documented Baxter's ownership and warned against any further attempt to remove, transfer, surrender, or interfere with him. I wasn't trying to ruin her life. I was making sure she couldn't keep rewriting mine. After she received the letter, her tone changed. The vague posts disappeared. She eventually posted a short correction saying Baxter had been returned to his legal owner and that some of her previous statements did not accurately reflect the full circumstances. It was not a real apology. It was clearly written to protect her. But it was enough to end the public lie. We arranged for her belongings to be collected while Wade was with me. I boxed nothing personal beyond what was necessary. She handled her things. I stayed mostly in another room. At one point, She stopped in the hallway and said, "Can we please talk without an audience?" I said no. Her face tightened. 3 years, Levi. I know. You're really going to end all of this over one mistake? I looked at her for a long second. No. A mistake is forgetting to ask before changing dinner plans. Planning this for weeks, lying about me, taking my dog, using him to force me into rules I never agreed to, and then telling our friends I neglected him. That's not one mistake. That's a chain of choices. She started crying again. I was trying to make us better. You were trying to make me easier to control. That is not fair. It doesn't have to feel fair to you. She stared at me like she was waiting for the version of me who would soften the statement, reassure her, or meet her halfway. That version of me was the reason things had gone so far. So I didn't soften it. I said, "This is over." She left with the last of her things that afternoon. Afterward, the apartment felt strange for a while. Quieter, but not peaceful right away. I had gotten used to checking how Sienna might react before doing ordinary things. I would reach for something at the grocery store and hear her voice in my head telling me it was a bad choice. I would think about inviting Wade over and catch myself wondering whether I should ask permission. That was probably the part one disliked most. Not that she had made rules, but that I had started carrying those rules around even when she wasn't there. Baxter adjusted faster than I did. Within 2 days, he was back to sleeping with one paw on my ankle. I updated everything I could think of. Microchip contact, vet authorization, daycare pickup list, emergency contact. I kept his adoption documents and medical records stored in 2 secure places. I told the daycare plainly that nobody but the people listed had permission to remove him. Wade joked that Baxter now had better identity protection than most people. He wasn't wrong. A week after the breakup, I cooked a steak at home. Not as some grand act of rebellion. I was hungry and wanted one. Baxter sat at a respectful distance because, despite Sienna's claims, he actually does no commands. I looked down at him and said, "Don't make this symbolic." His tail hit the floor twice. I gave him one small piece after I finished eating. Then I took him for a walk. There wasn't some huge transformation after that. I didn't suddenly become a different person. I still eat vegetables. I still try to sleep enough. I still make choices Sienna would probably call healthy. The difference is that they are mine. That is what I had failed to protect early enough. I kept treating every new rule as too small to fight over. Milk wasn't worth an argument. Groceries weren't worth an argument. A restaurant order wasn't worth making a scene. A joke in front of friends wasn't worth embarrassing her back. Individually, I was right about some of that. But I missed the pattern. Every time I gave up a small choice just to keep the peace, Sienna learned that peace was something she could charge me for. By the time she took Baxter, she genuinely believed she had the right to decide what I needed, what I was allowed to value, and what she could remove until I cooperated. She kept saying she was trying to make me better. The truth is, I only got better after I stopped letting her control me. If you like the stories, don't forget to leave a comment and support the channel by subscribing. See you in the upcoming stories.